Welcome to Check on Your Mates. I have with me here today a very special guest, Clint Bruce. He's a former NFL player and also a former Navy SEAL turned entrepreneur. So, Clint, thank you so much for coming in
Yeah, my
today.
pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah.
You have a really important mission, and it's something that's easy to be a part of, and excited to build into. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
No, I super appreciate that.
You've had some great conversations with some folks in Dallas over the last few days.
Yeah,
haven't you?
absolutely. No, It's been really great. I mean, it's my first time in Texas, and I'm like, wait, I kind of want to move here.
Yeah,
it's
it
just,
happens.
Yeah.
Texas has that effect. It sure does. So, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm super appreciative you can come in.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, I just wanted to get into it because time is of the essence here, but today we're here to talk about men's mental health specifically. As a lot of you know, it's a silent national crisis with 79% of men making up the suicides in the United States. And that number has only increased. 2022 alone, more men have died by suicide than any year. This includes World War II and just any event in the past. So it's really a catastrophe. And just hearing from a really inspirational man like yourself will help so many people. And super appreciate you making the time. But
yeah, it's cool. And I think what's fun is, like, if you look at my pedigree and kind of like, oh, that's a super talented guy. It's really not. I mean, I'm much more of an everyman than most people think.
Yeah.
I just try hard. And that's this repeatable skill that anybody else can have, right? And I think one of the reasons sometimes men tap out of kind of this life is they overestimate the significance of talent. And I'm a fly in the ointment of talent is the winning argument, right? I jokingly call myself the achieving average. I'm an achieving average, but I'm not an average achiever. What that means, if you were to aggregate all my gifts and abilities, you'd find me to be a high C or a low B in just about everything except for looks. I'm a good-looking guy. It just is what it is. You know, my wife laughed too when I say that, which is hurtful. No, I'm joking.
No, you're just being humble.
But the way I look at it is the mountain makes all men and women average if you're aiming high enough. And if you don't start climbing with angles and allies and advantages, you won't make it very far. And talent's an advantage, but it's only 1/3 of the equation. And it's not that it's not important, it's not just the most important thing, right? So if you have angles, meaning constantly refining your craft, getting better at what it is you do. If you have allies, meaning you surround yourself with people who mean what they say as much as you do, and then you maximize whatever talent, treasure, and time that you have, then you're gonna win. But if all you have is talent, and I've got angles and allies, I'm gonna win. And so I think so many men, and not just men, I think everybody in particular kind of underestimates their ability to be successful just because they're willing to hurt more, try hard, and do it for longer than competition, right? Talent, not thinking you have enough talent is never the reason to not try anything. And I'm an example of what happens when you just try, right? The upper half of the bottom third of everything I've done, but there, right? So does that make sense?
No, absolutely.
Cool.
And it was surprising for me to learn too, just throughout interviewing several men, that men also suffer from imposter syndrome. Because it's something that women are open about, but I feel like men kind of suffer in silence about that, of feeling not enough. Yeah. And every girl that I talk to can relate. But it was just really interesting.
Yeah, especially
to hear that.
I think imposter syndrome is a human phenomenon.
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
So every gender is going to experience that, especially when you're chasing somebody, right? Like when you have these iconic personalities in your life that you've lived with, or you've watched. I mean, all of us are mimics to an extent, right? I mean, you know, all of us are aggregates of what we've seen and what we've done and who we've been around. We're composites of these people that built into us, or these people that we watch from afar, right? So in some ways we can't help but struggle with that imposter syndrome because we're not the complete version of that, but we never should have been in the first place. And kind of with our facility right around the corner, we call it the high ground. And one of the reasons I call it the high ground is where you always want to be. And on the maps that I've lived on, the ball field, the battlefield, the boardroom, and the breakfast table, what I've realized in my almost 50 years of life is the way you get to the high ground is the same whatever map you're on. You find and follow the right people to the right places, and you become your version of what you love about them. Not them 2.0, your version of what you love most about them. And so being imprinted on and being a reflection of someone who built into you is a really, really powerful thing, and really the only way you get anything done. But then we got to shelve this belief that because we're not exactly like them, or we're not exactly who everybody thinks we are, that we're imposters. And that's kind of how I've reconciled that. The whole people go, you're never enough. I'm like, well, what is enough? Like, if you're never enough, what is enough? And then how far from that are you? And what most people really can't articulate is what enough is. And if you don't know what enough is, how are you not enough?
I love that.
Yeah, so
that's really well said.
Yeah.
But obviously you've gone through several careers, more than a lot of people can say they've done in a lifetime at your young age now. I mean, it's incredible. But what would you say in terms of awareness for men's mental health specifically? How has that changed throughout your career? Multiple careers, awareness just around
one of the things I'm excited to see is the recognition of mental health as a performance factor. Like, once we recognize it's a performance factor, we're much more comfortable going, hey, I need to improve that element of performance. So, like, hey, speed is a performance factor. Am I fast enough? Can I get faster? If not, how do I get faster? When we recognize mental health as a performance factor, and that staying mentally fit will help you perform regardless of what you're doing, then it becomes a kind of a fitness meter vice and indictment on whether you're strong or weak, or all these other things, right? So the fact that it's being considered a performance lens, we can talk about it more freely, right? It's not a weakness thing. It's a, hey, what have I done to increase my mental resilience and my mental strength? And we should be asking it with the same conversational ease that we're going, like, hey, how do I make my bench stronger, my squat stronger? How do I run faster? How do I swim faster? So for me, the elements of performance, mental fitness is part of it. And so mental health is kind of a part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I like that it's become considered, it's not a morality and not a virtue thing. It's a performance thing. And if you want to perform at a high level, then you have to take care of yourself mentally. What does that look like mentally? And everybody's story is a little bit different, but transparency and authenticity, I've said this before, authenticity is what you call vulnerability when you're not scared. When you're not scared, it's called authenticity. When you are scared, it's called vulnerability. But it's the same thing. And there's nothing wrong with being scared,
Absolutely.
So I don't have issues with fear. I've told my daughters, I have 3 daughters. And I'm a words guy, and I don't mean to get wrapped around the axle, but I don't like the word fearless. I just don't like it. It's one of the best books ever about any SEAL I know, named Adam Brown. It's an incredible book called Fearless. But for me, fear is a signal, like a traffic light, like a stop sign. And what you do after that signal is what I wrestle with my girls. And I say, hey, the word I don't like is afraid. Like, I want you to be unafraid. I want you to be fearless. I want you to pay attention to what's going on around you, but I want you to be unafraid. And when you hit a fear moment, there's really only 2 roads you can go on. There's the low road called afraid, and the high road is being ready. And the way to be ready is training, teammates, resources, plans, technology, all these other things. And so my idea is like unafraid, be unafraid. And how do we handle that? And how do we work through that, right? So for me, talking about it is, I tell guys all the time, it's okay to not be okay. But you can't stay not okay.
Right.
It's also okay to be okay. Like, sometimes everybody thinks they have to have something bad going on because everybody else has something going on. I was like, hey, it's okay to be okay. It's okay to not be okay. It's not okay to stay not okay, right?
That's true.
So how do we do that?
No, absolutely. No, I listened to that podcast where you were talking about vulnerability is when there is fear present.
Yeah.
And authenticity is when you're unafraid.
Yeah,
And
but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's like, hey, are you running because you want to be in shape? Or you're running because there's a bear chasing you. Like,
True.
either way, there's going to be value in run both
Absolutely.
times. Run both times, right?
Yeah.
But so for me, it's, whether it's authenticity, whether it's vulnerability, it doesn't matter. It's whatever helps you get to this high ground. That's what you need to be doing.
Yeah.
In conversations like this,
Absolutely.
uncomfortable, awkward conversations. Not this isn't. This isn't. But what I'm saying is, like,
Right.
Galatians 6:9 says, "Do not grow weary doing what's right, and a time reap a harvest and a benefit." So what is right? And then you just do it, and you do it till it feels right. I had this great coach in high school. He said, "Clint, do what's right because it's right till it feels right." And then, in the most elite elements of performance, I've played college football. I played briefly in the NFL. I've been in the SEAL teams, right? One of the things that's so fascinating and exciting now is that every one of these really elite terrains of performance, there's a mental health professional embedded into the organization.
Wow.
They recognize it. That's
Yeah.
one of the things I mean, if you just want to feel good about life, just watch Ted Lasso. It's just one of the.
I love
it's
that.
just it's such a good show.
So good.
But the integration of mental health professionals into that's not Hollywood. Some of my closest, Eric Potterat's one of the most brilliant men in the world, and he was the head psychiatrist for the SEAL teams. And his book's coming out in February, but we knew that, hey, straight head, straight aim, right? So I love where it is now, and that not only is it okay to talk about, it's a performance thing. If you want to be good, be mentally fit.
Yeah. That's a really healthy way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm so impressed with you, Clint, just that you have such a strong mentality and continue to do so. I mean, I can't imagine what it was like integrating after serving. Would you mind elaborating a little bit about that?
Yeah.
What resources were there for you?
Yeah, so that's one of the ways, and that's why I use that map analogy a lot. Like, one of the questions I get asked all the time, especially by young men, kind of given my background, is, hey, what's your favorite gun? And I always slow down. I go, are you asking what my favorite gun is or what my favorite weapon is? And they'll kind of go, it's the same thing. I'm like, no, it's not. A gun is a tool. A weapon is what I use to win.
I love that.
My favorite weapon is a map. Because if I have a map, I have everything. I know where the bad guy will be. I know what to come in, what to bring, what to leave. I know how to get home. And if I have a map, the worst I'll ever be is wrong. But I won't be lost. And wrong and lost are different. They're different animals. I've been both. I've been wrong and I've been lost. I don't like them both. But if you're wrong, I mean, being lost is terrifying. If you're lost, any move could be wrong. But if you're wrong, it's just a matter of realizing it, remembering where you said you'd go, availing yourself to the wisdom of those who've been where you say you want to go, to the or who are there now, and the camaraderie of those who want to get there as badly as you do, and then you just do the work, right? And so for me, kind of like I said earlier, when I described my life, I've lived on the ball field, the battlefield, the boardroom, and the breakfast table. And so those are literal seasons of my life. You know, the ball field as an athlete, the battlefield as a member of the military, the boardroom as an entrepreneur. The breakfast table is the most important map, and we're born onto one, and then we build one. The breakfast table is where I'm building and leading a family that loves me and that matters to others. But so for me, when I began to look at transitioning from one map to the other, it began to make more sense. I mean, the reality is we would never invade a country. If you look at coming from the ball field to the boardroom, the private sector, as an invasion, we would never invade a country the way we invade the boardroom from the battlefield or the ball field, right? We just don't do the work that we would do. And the question is why? Well, there's no good reasons. So all we have to do is replicate what we already knew how to do. Hey, how do I get a trained familiarization? How do I better understand industries, right? How did I get good on the ball field? How to get good on the battlefield? And I've already said this. The way I got to the high ground on any of those maps is I found and followed the right people to the right places. In sports and military, it's a little bit easier because those are assigned to you. There's kind of like this infrastructure that you step into, right? You know, as an athlete, you got a coach. You got position guys ahead of you in your position that are a couple of years older, and in the military, you step in and there's your senior enlisted and there's your chief, and in the private sector, you have to build that. And it took me longer to realize I had to build it. But once I realized it, I started building it. And I started figuring out, what do I know how to do that the men and women I want to be around and learn from need? Like, how do I add value to them so I can earn the right to ask the dumb question? And all questions feel dumb until you realize everybody's got the same questions. So either everybody's dumb or it's not a dumb question, right?
Yeah, there's no such thing as a dumb question.
No, just the one you asked again because you didn't listen the first time, right?
That's
Other
true.
than that.
Well said.
But I mean, everybody's got questions, man, and earn the right to ask them and then take notes and just make new mistakes. And it took me far too long to remember that how I got to the high ground of the ball field and the battlefield would work in the boardroom again. And at the breakfast table, I don't have a father. My father died when I was young.
So sorry.
And my daughters can't afford mistakes, right? So I would find guys at church. I'd run up to guys at church like, hey, your daughter didn't hate you. Like, how do you do that? And I would ask questions. And my wife would like, he doesn't mean anything. He's just very intense, right? But I was like, your teenage daughter doesn't hate you. How do you do that? Give me the hand. She's holding your hand. How do you do that? But I'd literally ask guys, I'm like, your daughter doesn't hate you. How do you do that?
Yeah, you're like,
and then
give me
I'd
the
take
secrets.
notes and then I'd do that.
I love that.
So it wasn't really, it's very simple. It's not easy,
Right.
right? And we got to make sure we're not standing in the way, our ego, our pride, our fear, standing in the way of letting it be as simple as it ought to be. Hey, you have a great relationship with your daughters. Yeah. How'd you do that? Was it accidental or intentional? I don't know any relationships that are accidentally awesome.
That's true. That's really well said.
What are the intentional things that you did that I can do?
Yeah.
And then I do them, right? So it's just like going to the weight room. How'd you get strong? I'll do your workout until I come up with my own.
Yeah.
That's how I did it as a father, how I try to do it as a businessman. And I just got to make sure I'm not in my own way.
I love that. No, that's super well said. If people were as intentional with relationships around them, whether that's family, friends, work relationships, partnerships, marriage, then the world would be a better place, because people just don't really want to put in the work sometimes. And
they expect more of themselves than they really realistically ought to. I'm not about settling. I'm not about making it easy for yourself.
Absolutely.
But there's a very clear moment when I was really struggling as an entrepreneur, as a business person, and externally everybody would think I was doing great, right? Mm-hmm. But I knew it was so much harder for me than it should have been. So what am I doing, right?
Right.
But then I remember sitting back and going, well, hold on, Clint. If you're going to be honest with yourself, be all the way honest with yourself.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to be a very good football player? Were you very good the minute you started playing? No. I wasn't. I loved football way before football loved me. It probably took me 6 or 7 years to become a really good football player.
Wow.
All right, in the SEAL teams, how long did it take me? Were you great the first day you showed up? No, right? So it took me 4 to 5 years to 6 years to be really good at the craft. Yet in year 3 of being an entrepreneur, I'm expecting myself to perform at this elite level. Well, hold on, Clint. If it took you 6 to 7 years to be great at anything that was important before, why shouldn't it take you 6 to 7 years to be great at this too? So being realistic with ourselves and understanding, that's the thing about imposter syndrome. I tell my daughters this all the time. If you're going to compare anything, compare everything. And once you compare everything, you might just realize you're where you need to be. Right?
Yeah.
You want to compare the house, then compare the loveless marriage. You want to compare the neat car, compare the fact that father's never there, right? And so when you compare everything, most of the time you just realize you're kind of where you need to be, in all things being equal, right? And there's these people that we think have so many more advantages than us, and then you sit down and you talk to them, and they're dealing with heartbreak on one of those maps that we didn't have to deal with, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the best ways to wage war with imposter syndrome is to compare everything if you're going to compare anything. And what you will find is there's something about that person's life that they've endured, that they've overcome, that you wouldn't wish on anybody, to include yourself.
That's true.
And then you just kind of okay, here I am, where I am, doing what I'm supposed to do. Let's get back to work.
That's really well said.
It's everybody's own race. Right?
Yeah.
There's I told my daughters this one time. I wrote this on their wall. My whole deal is you're competing with yesterday's you. That's it. It's you versus yesterday's you, right? Mm-hmm. And if you are greater than or equal to yesterday's you, then you won today. Yeah. And my daughter came up to her, she's like, Dad, I love that. I go, thank you. She goes, you did the arrow wrong. So technically, you are less than or equal to yesterday. I'm like, you know what I'm saying? Just switch the arrow around. But my whole deal is just be greater than or equal to yesterday's you. And you win.
Yeah.
So.
No, on another podcast, I heard you saying, or I heard the guest saying that they wanted you to hold them accountable to be vulnerable, or in your words, authentic.
Yeah.
And something I'm struggling with is it's imposter syndrome, but kind of against myself, before grief. I don't know. I pride myself on being a good friend and being there for people. And I still, to this day, just get anxiety about being a bad friend. If I'm slow to reply to people and they're like, no, you're a great friend. You went through so much during, especially it's been 1.5 years now, but right after everything happened, I just was convinced that I was a bad friend, and it's something that I still worry about.
Yeah.
So I can totally relate to, just taking it day by day and knowing that you're doing your best and what is perfect, what is being a perfect friend.
Well, think about this too. Only the good wrestle with guilt.
Yeah, that's true.
Only the good struggle with guilt.
Actually, that's really well said.
So
a sociopath wouldn't
if
be
you struggle
about
with
that.
guilt, it's indicative of your goodness, right?
Right.
Only the good struggle with guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tell people that are wrestling with guilt, I'm recognize that as evidence of your goodness, right? If you didn't have any guilt, you like you said, the sociopath doesn't care, right?
Yeah.
So and it's not. I'm not necessarily justifying guilt or saying rest in guilt or kind of. I'm just saying if you wrestle with guilt, it means you're good, because only the good wrestle with guilt. And so build from there. Build from the fact that you have a goodness in you that makes you wish you would have done something different, better, more, longer, whatever, right? And I always tell people, shame is the shovel that Satan will use to bury you.
Yeah.
I don't have issues with regret. Regret's okay. Regrets, I wish I would have, I wish I wouldn't have. Regret is what happens when we mine that mistake for everything of value, right? As we look at it in time. Regret is investing time to mine that mistake in anything that'll help you or anybody else do something better. Shame is every second after that. Every second you get that mistake, after you've mined it for whatever value you can get out of it, that's shame. And shame has no value. There's no intrinsic value to shame. There's no value proposition. There's nothing that gets better because of it. All you're doing with shame is stealing time from yourself and others. So regret's okay. That's why we watch film and football.
Yeah.
Hey, don't do that. Do that again, right? But shame is a thief.
No, it
And
absolutely
it is the
is.
shovel that Satan loves to use to bury us.
Yeah, to attack.
Yeah.
And he attacks the strong.
100%.
Yeah.
I always tell people, if you're not getting shot at, no one's worried about you.
That's true.
Like, you don't want to be the guy who's like, hey, why is no one, like, I don't love getting shot at, but I
Right.
also don't like not being shot at at all. It's like being a receiver that no one covers. Like, hey,
True.
hey, I'm open. And the quarterback's like, I know you're open. There's a reason you're open. So I'm going to throw it to you. You're not going to catch it. Like, if no one's covering you and you're a receiver, you got to ask yourself some questions. Like, why are they not covering me? Because they're not worried, right? So, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Good.
Yeah, it's really well said. And that actually kind of brings me to my next question.
Sure.
What's a risky choice that you made that you're glad that you made?
All of them. I mean, that's the hardest question to answer because, I mean, that's kind of my thing. I kind of go where I don't know. Like, you know, I get to go speak to a lot of companies and stuff like that. And I have this kind of presentation called Pursuing Elite.
I love that.
What Pursuing Elite says is there's really only 5 outcomes to anything that matters. And if it's not on the map, it doesn't matter. If it's not on the ball field, battlefield, board, and breakfast table, it doesn't matter. And so for me, there's really only 5 outcomes. There's bad, average, good, excellent, and elite. And most of life is about what outcomes you're willing to accept from yourself and others on these maps that matter most to you, right? And so for me, there's a difference between being excellent and being elite. And the difference is, are you done or you're not done yet? You know, there's nothing wrong with excellence. Excellence is this place on a map that you get to. Elite is this mythical ridgeline, this gravity that just makes you want to see what else you can do so you can use your time. Like, we want to steward our time. The worst thing we can ever do is waste the time those we love and miss no longer have. So we have to use our time, right? Like you're doing with this. And what I tell people is, like, the qualities that I've seen on the maps that I've lived on of the most elite people I've been around, there's 5 of them, and I call them the pursuit points. And elites are balanced, they're curious, they're tribal, they're intentional, and they're authentic. And curiosity, for me, so those pursuit points, it's not a math equation. It's not this plus this plus this plus this plus this. What they are is, I look at them as 5 lanes on the interstate to where we think is most important for us, right? But I will tell you, if you get curiosity right, it kind of sets everything else in motion. And for me, I define curiosity as, there's really 4 things. Curiosity is courage. It's courage because the reason we don't ask questions is fear.
True.
So I'm almost a 50-year-old man. I'm somewhat accomplished. I've done some things.
Yeah.
When I'm a room full of people that I respect and I admire, to this day I have a knot in the pit of my stomach when I have a question. Because I'd rather they think they already, I'd rather them think I already know, right? I'm afraid of the answer. I'm afraid of the work that comes with the answer. I'm afraid of admitting myself I don't know. I'm afraid of what you'll think about me if I don't know. Well, that's fear.
Right.
So when you see someone doing this, you know they have courage. Because that's all courage is action in the face of fear. So the first thing is curiosity is courage. The second thing is curiosity is a creator. Every great thing in my life, I can reverse engineer to a question that scared me.
Wow.
I wonder if I can. I wonder if she will.
Wow.
I wonder. Every great thing in my life, I can reverse engineer to a question. The greatest things in my life go back to a question that scared me. Like, I wonder if I can make it in the NFL. I wonder if I can make it in the SEAL teams. I wonder if I can start a company. I wonder if she'll say yes. I wonder if all these other things with my bride, right? And so curiosity is a creator. It's courage. It's a creator. Curiosity is a catalyst.
Yeah.
whatever that next level is of performance. Curiosity is going to reveal that faster than anything else, right? That 1% performance difference doesn't find you. Serendipity is not a strategy. It's great, but it's not a strategy. And then curiosity is a complacency killer, and complacency is a killer. So for me, I think maybe the best habit I have, and it's a cultivated habit, is I ask myself and other people a lot of questions. And the more nervous the questions make me, the more points I give myself on this way that we measure ourselves at the end of every day, right? And so for me, like, my daughters have known this for years. I told them, like, hey, here's how I measure your weeks. Every week, ask 3 people you don't know. Ask 3 people you already know 1 question you've ever asked them before. And ask 1 person you don't know 3 questions every week. And my daughters are famous for the way they ask questions and who they ask questions. Because I also want my daughters to be the ones that go, hey, why are we doing this? Why are we going here, right? And like for me, my daughters, like here's what's gonna happen. My daughter's gonna be on a date with some blue-eyed baby kissing quarterback. And they're gonna ask 2 questions. And the first one is this: hey stud, why is your hand on my thigh? They're gonna ask that question. And then the second question is, have you ever been punched in the throat? Why is your hand on my thigh? Have you ever been punched in the throat? My girl's gonna ask some questions because they're courageous.
I love that.
But you can train for courage.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I will tell you this, that when you're about to ask a question in a room full of people that you respect and admire, that knot in the pit of your stomach is the exact same knot when that ramp cracks open at 20,000 feet and you're about to jump out. It's the same sensation, right? Now, at 20,000 feet, it stays there longer, and you feel, but the phenomenon's the same, right? And some of that has to do with the brain. You know, again, I tell my daughters these things, and the reason I preface it with that is, to the listeners and the viewers here, like if I tell my daughters this, you know, I believe it, right? That's the thing I'll measure myself by for the rest of my life. And what I tell my daughters is, the human machine has 4 performance systems: the body, the brain, the mind, and the soul, right? This is not medical. This is my assumption. The body, the analogy I use is the body's a car, the brain is a steering wheel, the mind is a driver, and the soul is this inherent sense of destination. The body and the brain are just machines. Just like a car, they're machines. And when we focus on mental health, we build a mind that can impose its will on the body and the brain, or can remind the body and the brain that everything's gonna be okay. These are, you can cultivate mental strength just like you can cultivate leg strength in the gym. And for me, curiosity has been that squat rack. Curiosity is that bench. Curiosity is that deadlift. I can literally metric because every time you ask a question, you're repping that courage muscle, which is important because courage moments don't announce themselves. Courage moments are always ambushes, but you can train for them. You can train not to not feel that fear stimulus, but to not be afraid of it, right? Okay, I'm uncomfortable. What do? I start asking questions. What do I ask questions? The question that scares me the most, or the person that scares me the most? Now, you will almost always benefit from, who do I ask? If I ask the person that scares me the most, the question that scares me the most, at minimum, you can look at yourself as a brave person later on that day. You know?
Wow.
I tell people, run at the dogs, man, because sometimes the dog's scared too. Yeah. That dog's chasing you, turn around at that dog. Sometimes that dog goes like, what? Like, I'm not used to people running at me, right? So like maybe the dog's scared too. Maybe the dog will flinch, right? But run at the hard stuff, because a lot of times the hard stuff doesn't have a plan either. Yeah. You know?
No, that's really well said.
So.
No, that's awesome. And I love your analogy too of how mental strength should be a measurement too, and how that is also something that you need to train.
And you can make it stronger, and you can train it, metric it, measure it, make it better. And I tell you this, anybody who's watching this and listening to this, it probably won't take you too long to remember something that scared you, that you never thought you'd make it through and you never thought it would end. And all of a sudden you're like, well, I did make it. It did end. It hurt, but not for as long as much as I thought it would. Yeah. And so in that instance, history, past performance is an indication of future performance, right? If, you know, what else have you already made it through that you never thought you'd make it through? True. And because you can say that, you have the ability to say, maybe I might make it through this too. Yeah. So.
Yeah, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I've just noticed a trend in my personal life, at least in my network, that by age like 25 to 30, men have lost several buddies or at least one or had some sort of connection by then. And it's normalized and it's unfortunate. And
Yep.
I had to be the bearer of the bad news. My last boyfriend, Cameron, passed away by suicide, and I had to notify some of his friends, and a lot of their response was the same. They said, Katie, I have lost so many people, I can't even. And it's all guys that they've lost. And of course, girls too, but there's so many resources for women. And
Well, I also think girls commune better.
yes, absolutely. Like
Yeah.
I can have a friend call me at any hour. I won't think anything of it. I will pick up. Absolutely. She
Yeah.
can call me crying, no judgment, and we'll speak to her for hours. And we have that way of communicating. Obviously, men and women communicate completely different. But
When you're given the brain
yeah.
less uncertainty to consider, when it was, I tell people all the time, I go, hey, how you doing? And they tell me good. I'm like, prove it. Like, what do you mean prove it? Like, how you doing? Good. Prove it. I'm like, what?
prove
I'm like,
it. I love that.
Like, prove it. Tell me the last good thing that happened on the ball field, battlefield, boardroom, breakfast table. Give me something good that happened. And people sit back and go, well, this good thing happened. This good thing happened. I was like, okay, cool. But I make people prove it. I'm not into people. I'm not into people telling me they're doing good and,
Yeah.
and just accepting that at face value. But what's really fun
Wow.
is one of two things happens when I say prove it. Either they can, or they can't, and we talk. But I'm like, how you doing? I'm good, man. All right, prove it. What do you mean prove it? Prove it. Tell me what's good. Tell me what's good happened on the ball field, battlefield, boardroom, and breakfast table. Then I celebrate that with them. Or I remind us, like, hey, man, didn't you just win something? Oh, yeah, I forgot about that, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. The world hits us the way it does. Or they're like, very rarely has someone gone, I can't. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's find something that we can be excited about or look forward to, right? But how you doing? Prove it. It's what I do.
That's actually just gave me chills. It's an amazing takeaway for listeners too. Like
Yeah.
when you check on your buddies, because a lot of Cameron's friends, they were like, yeah, like I checked on him like a month ago and thought, everything was cool. And a lot of people were blindsided, including
Yeah.
myself. And I don't know if you've seen this video, I'll link it for you and also listeners, but there's a English football video, and basically these guys are in the audience and it's talking about men's mental health, and the happy guy ends up being the empty seat at the end. And it's always the happiest people, a lot of times, not always the case, that choose to hide it.
Well, I also think men have a habit, like we have a habit of answering what we want the answer to be.
Yeah.
I'm good because I want to be good.
Right.
I want it to be good. I'm convincing myself I'm good. I don't
Yeah.
want to be a burden to you. So I tell guys, like, you're not lying when you tell me you're good. You're just wrong.
No, 100%.
Right? Like I was like, hey, no one's a liar when I say I'm doing good. We're
Yeah.
just telling you I want to be doing good. I'm like, cool. And one of the ways you can remember that you're doing good is by, literally, if you think about, hey, what's the last good thing that happened?
Yeah.
And that's why the maps are important to me, because it allows me to kind of partition and not compartmentalize, but offer a framework. I can find something positive on one of those. The way I run the maps now in my life is the ball field is take care of myself mentally and physically. The battlefield is protect those who've been entrusted to me morally, mentally, spiritually, and physically. The boardroom is provide for those who've been entrusted to me. And the breakfast table is raise a family that loves me and that matters to others.
I love that.
And so I look at every one of those things like, okay, I don't remember a day where I failed on all four of those maps.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's three maps. I suck at three, but I got one right. But that's enough to hang on to, right? And oh, by the way, I probably didn't suck at the other three as much as I thought I did. I'm just really hard on myself. But the more visual I can make it, the more evidence-based I can make it in a relative evidence that matters to me, the more it works, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, how you doing? Good. Prove it.
Prove it. I think that's a great takeaway a lot of people can take with them.
Yeah.
Prove it. And then if they kind of stumble, remind them, and then remind them why they have reasons to celebrate.
Yeah. And if they can't, like, hey, let's do one. Like one,
Yeah.
you just won. You just won on the ball
Yes.
field right now, because now we're talking about something you didn't know you could talk about with someone you didn't know you could talk to. That's a huge win
Absolutely.
on the ball field of life, right?
Yeah.
So now you got something, right? So, yeah, I try to be pretty practical, pretty intentional, right?
Yeah.
And I tell people talking about it doesn't always help. Talking through it always does. just like tackling. Hit through him, not to him. You hit to a guy, he may bounce off. You hit through a guy, he's probably going to go down. Everything goes back to football. All goes back to football.
No, I love that analogy. Hit through them, not to it.
Yeah, hit through it, not to it. And I was like, hey, let's not get to the problem and just walk away. Let's go through it.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing about being old. I'll probably
You're not old.
I'll
Don't
probably,
say that.
I'll probably
You're not
already
allowed
made
to
it.
say that.
I say it proudly. I'm like, it's in the Bible, like silver hair is a man's glory, right? And so, like, for me, I'm like, hey, man, I think my superpower is I have the uncanny ability to survive my own mistakes and just make new ones. And what I found is I'm extremely gifted at making mistakes. I can make mistakes, and I don't think anybody's ever like, you tried that? I'm like, yeah, I know. I tried it. It's dumb. But, I just make new ones. So I take notes, and I tell these guys, like, hey, man, it's I'm not diminishing what you're going through. I just want you to know that people have made it through it before, right? And because they have, you can too, if you're willing to do the work that they did or your own version of that, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times that conversation starts with, man, how you doing? Good. Prove it. And then more often than not, when you go through the work of figuring out why you think you're doing good, you'll find out you're closer to good than you thought you were. Yeah. But it doesn't mean everything's okay. I'm not about rose-colored glasses.
Right.
And Seneca says we fear an imagination far more than reality, right? So when you start talking about the problem becomes real. It becomes tangible, and now you can kill it, right? Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah, and I feel like that's why I'm able to do this podcast now too. Just during my grieving after I lost Cam, I just did not drink at all. I moved back to my parents. I was in my childhood bed. I went through the worst of it, and it was horrible. It was not fun,
sure.
But I felt everything I needed to feel to the fullest, so I could best serve others now.
Yeah,
and that's why I'm able to be where I am now, because I just completely went through everything wrong.
Yeah, because emotions are real.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people emotions are like water. Water is the strongest force on the planet. Like, you can't beat it, right?
Right.
And water always wins. Like, and what I tell people is, like, emotions are like water. It's going to get out.
Absolutely.
It's going to get out as steam. You're going to stuff it, then you're just going to cook off. It's going to get out as ice. You're just going to ice the world out. Or it's going to come out as water. Tears, emotions. And
Absolutely.
you just dose it out. But water always wins. You got to find a way to distribute it through the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I knew it would just haunt me later if I just didn't, face it head on. And I'm 100%. So grateful that I did and had my family.
That's great
to
that you had
support.
an infrastructure kind of retreat into.
Absolutely. And I recognize everyone doesn't have that. So that's why it's so important to find a support system.
Everybody can build their version of it, for sure.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't have a dad. I haven't had a dad most of my life, right? So I could use that as an excuse to be a crap father, or I can find guys. I can remember what I can about my dad and find guys that are doing it well, right? So it's either an excuse or fuel, like which of the two, right? And I own that choice, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of the victimhood thing, man. Like, guys complain in special operations. Oh, like, there's no victims in the special operations community. Look what we did. Like, we tried real hard to get here. It's just hard, right? So, and I got to remind myself of that too. But whatever infrastructure you don't have, it can be made available to you in some form or version of it, in some percentage of it, right? And that's what we have to do. We have to assemble those things for ourselves. And because we can't say that things weren't available, because they are.
How are you kind of able to find that support system, and what advice would you give to listeners who are looking to find a mentor or further support system?
Man, I've always been real aggressive about it. And I was kind of raised on a football field where you always have more than one coach and all these other things, and you have defensive coordinators. So I just knew in the peak version of my prior self and all these other things, what I had was this infrastructure, these mentors, these teammates, all these other things. So replicating that in the private sector was very natural for me, because I recognized it as key to any success I had earlier. And at the breakfast table, it became like, all right, well, who's my head coach as a dad? Who's the guy that's a little bit further than me? And I was like, well, I'll just go find a guy. Hey, how are you doing that, right? And people I love sharing my scars, man, because when I share my scars, these guys have heard me say it 100 times. They could probably finish the story for you if I don't. I go, hey, listen, you own your scars own you. And you own them if you can talk about them. If you can talk about them, you own them. If you can't, they own you. Yeah. And that's where I tell people, it's like, man, do you own your scars own you?
I love that.
And so for me, the way you own scars is you make them available to other people, right? And like, hey, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, right? And again, there's a form of like there's redemption in that. Like
Right.
there's no time machine. Like you don't get to when I keep a man from making a mistake that I made, I don't go back to when I made that mistake, but I do claw that back. I claw that time is redeemed. What was a -8 in my life is now maybe a -6, maybe a -4 because I didn't let other people do it. So redemption matters, and mentoring is an interesting form of redemption. It's how you steal from shame. When you steal time back from shame, when you make your scars available to other people, they lose their power over you. They just become a page in the book, you know, amongst thousands of pages, right?
Oh,
It puts
so
it in
well said.
context. So
That's so well said. And that's actually been a common theme of just everyone I've interviewed so far is just being authentic, not vulnerable because that comes from fear, but authentic.
well, but vulnerability is fine too. Like
Yes.
it's okay. It's okay to be afraid. Like
No,
you
that's
know,
true.
I've had fear before I do anything great. I just
Yeah.
don't stay on fear.
Absolutely.
Unafraid is like be unafraid, but
Yeah.
fear's okay. Fear's natural.
That's true.
You know,
Yeah.
fear's a
It's an
traffic signal.
instinct.
Driving to India once, you were like, traffic signals are cool. I like
True.
those things, man. They are helpful.
Yeah,
Right. So it's just
absolutely.
a signal.
No, absolutely, because that just ultimately creates a community because there's so many
Yeah.
people suffering in silence that you never would have known, and
Yeah.
it's like if they only told me. And
Yeah. My whole deal is like, I got asked by this really, really great college football player this year, like, how do you make sure you're a great teammate? I'm like, man, my deal is be the first to the hurt. If I can be the first to the hurt and I can stay on the hurt the longest, that's how I measure myself. Like, hey, am I willing to hurt first and most? And when you have, like, in the SEAL teams, you have 16 guys willing to hurt the first and most. You got some barrel-chested freedom fighters when that's happening. When everybody's
I can only
trying to
imagine.
be the most responsible. Like, I've been in units where we were arguing about who the fault was. Oh, it's my fault. I'm like, you weren't even here. You were on leave. It can't be your fault. No, I should have told you better. I'm like, nope. There's arguments, and we're all trying to take the most blame. Like, no, it's my fault. I should have done
You're
better.
like, I'm taking the L.
yeah,
no me.
that's it. That's the whole deal. Like when you want to be the first to the hurt, I want to be the first to hurt, and I want to hurt the most. And you're arguing with dudes who gets to hurt. No, I want to hurt this time. Like that's a good system to be in, right? And so my deal is, find those people and be those people, right? Be what you want to find, and being what you want to find has a lot to do with actually finding it when it comes to relationships.
That's really well said.
Yeah. So.
No, that's amazing. I mean, you've done so much work. Like, just I feel like that kind of comes naturally to you too. Just
Well,
like
I think it's
the
because I
desire to
wasn't.
be better.
I think I always had to find a system. I
Yeah.
wasn't really talented enough to just show up and be good. So I had to figure out the mechanics of it. Like my gift is not being gifted, because I got to figure out the system. Like if you're bigger than me, but I'm lower than you, I'm stronger than you. If you're faster than me, but I know where you're going, now I'm faster than you. Like what's the mechanical advantage?
Yeah.
And I think that's served and continues to serve me well is understanding a system. And if there is no system, I build a version of one, and then I modify as needed based on success or failure.
I love that. No, that's really well said.
Yeah. It's like cooking in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Well, I do. Dude, don't cook it the same way last time. So
No, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the best mentality that you can have.
we're good.
Absolutely. But I wanted to ask you, this is a little bit of a deep question. So if you need a moment to ruminate,
Sure.
that's fine. Describe to me the worst day of your life and how you overcame that, and then we'll have a positive to follow, the best day of your life.
No, it's not a hard. It's not a hard question to answer. There's just been a lot of worst days in my life, and
Well, we can
there's
talk
many
about
mess
this
days in my life. Right?
Yeah.
Like worst day of your life is when you find out your dad passed away. Right.
Yeah.
Best day of your life is when you find yourself doing things you love to miss most about your dad. Right. Every one of those maps has a best and a worst day on it. And my deal is I'm not about trying to avoid the worst day. I'm just
Right.
like, hey man, things are gonna happen, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that's an example of one, but for me, there's no degrees of worse. There's bad, average, good, better, and best, right? And so my deal is like, there's just a lot of examples of that, but there's more examples of best than worst. And the best has always come out of the worst, right?
Absolutely.
So that'd be an example of it, losing my dad, losing friends, right? And then the best is man, there's more of those, right? So
That's true.
it's only a hard question to answer because there's so many of both. But there's more of best than worst for sure.
I believe that too.
Yeah.
I believe there's more good people than bad people.
100. I tell people all the time, like, there's three kinds of people in the world. There's good people doing good things, good people doing bad things, and bad people doing bad things. And there is evil in the world. There are bad people doing bad things, and you deal with them the way they make you deal with them. I was just like, bad guys got to vote. Stop it. No. Stop it. Or no. Okay. I told you the or. Now it's coming, right? But that population of bad people doing bad things is incredibly small. Like 0.00001% of the world. There are far more good people doing bad things and good people doing good things. And when good people are doing bad things, you got to step back and go, why?
Right.
Like, oh man, that guy's acting like he's got nothing left to live for. Well, does he think he has anything to live for? That guy's making decisions no good man has made. Well, has he ever been around a good man? Is he just doing what he thinks is good because that's what he's been exposed to? And that's what we do in the military, in the special operations community, man. We try to go to places and we try to radically impact the economics, education, and healthcare. There's three qualities exist in any region where we've had to go and fight. There's limited economic opportunity, the suppression of critical thinking, and there's the marginalization of the female voice. If those three things are there, evil's going to be there because there's no resistance to evil. So you go there and you try to erect one of those. Hey, can I create economic opportunity? Can I enhance and enrich critical thinking? Can I establish equity between the genders, right? And if you can do those things, you can change an environment. But if someone's acting like they got nothing to live for, step back and go, man, do they have anything to live for? Do they think they do? If I show them they have something to live for, will they stop doing bad things? Most of the time they will.
Yeah.
You make it safe to go from bad to good, and most people go to good.
Yeah. Something that I've learned, and I just feel like I kind of naturally am equipped with, is just, and this is something that helps me and may help other people, is just not taking things personal. Like if someone's mean to you, it's their own hurt. It's not a personal attack against you.
Yeah, I think
And I
Eleanor
feel like
Roosevelt
instead of being
said,
reactive.
I think Eleanor,
Yeah.
I could be wrong on the attribution, but I think Eleanor Roosevelt said is you'd worry less what people think about you when you realize how rarely they do.
Yeah.
Like,
That is
it takes
well said.
energy to wish ill upon someone, and
It
I
really
think
does.
everybody's redlined anyway. And like the way I do it, I just like, for me, it's Genesis 50:20. What man intended for evil, God will use for good. And somebody
That
was like,
gives me chills.
I just got to do what God wants me to do. And if I'm doing what God wants me to do, and you mess with that, you're messing with God, which is not going to go well. And if I'm not doing what God wants me to do, and you interrupt that, I may come back and thank you one day. Like, hey, remember that time you screwed me? Well, thank you, because it stopped me from heading this way I shouldn't have gone on anyway. So, and again, the whole, you'd worry less about what people think about you when you realize how little they think about you. I don't have a lot of time to sit around and go like, I don't like that guy, I don't like that guy, I don't like that. He's a jerk.
Yeah.
Like the scene in National Lampoon's Christmas, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. And he was like, hey, you're cool, you're cool. It's like, kiss my ass, kiss his ass, right?
Yes.
So.
No, 100%. But when you said Genesis 50:20, I actually just got chills because that's part of like checking your mates. And ultimately I was praying for my pain, my lowest to be turned into purpose. And it actually used to be in my bio and like one of my favorite verses. I have several, but do you know the rest of that verse?
Finish it for me.
For God intended it for good. What is being done now, the saving of many lives.
What man intended for evil, God will use for good, for the saving of many lives. Yeah. So when you look at it that way, you're like, okay, something good's going to come of this. And then it begins to lose its power of you immediately.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my anger verse. That's how I keep from...
That was my anger verse,
That's how I keep from turning green like the Incredible Hulk. It's like, all right, calm down.
That was in my anger phase of grief. And it was more so directed at people blaming me. Because, of course, like after a suicide, people want someone to blame, right? And that's human nature. So again, I didn't take that personal, knowing it's human nature. And people who were close to him didn't blame me. People who had just partied with him, met him like twice, have gone and drunk with him, would post crazy things. I almost had to change my number. I had my mom screen my calls. It was horrible.
Yeah,
I had to block.
I struggle sometimes to find the redemptive qualities of mass social media.
I know. So I just got off of those for a bit, but yeah, I mean, that is natural to want to blame someone, but it's something that we as society can do better when it comes to a suicide is, okay, like, what or why did you do it? And people often ask like why or what signs were shown, and signs are so nuanced and different for each person. Like
100%.
sometimes there's signs, sometimes there's not signs, you know?
That's
And
a
like
black
I don't
swan.
think that's a productive
black swan
question.
is what everybody thinks they should have seen, but
Right.
they couldn't. Now you know now. Like
Yeah.
9/11 makes sense in retrospect, but at the
Yeah.
time, you know, it's a phenomenon that kind of surprises you. And the reality is most people evidence one of these signs at some point in their lives. It's just them in totality with this context, right? So again, that's why I come back to prove it. You know,
Yeah.
hey, how you doing? Good, prove it.
I love that.
Yeah, and I do it to myself. Like this is one of these things where, like when somebody's claiming, I'm like, I'm good, and I just make myself prove it. I'm like, and here's why I'm good.
Yeah.
You know.
And someone who is like kind of curious how they can check on friends, that's again a great takeaway. Prove it. And even themselves, if they don't have many people to turn to ask themselves that, prove it, to force yourself to think of something you're proud of that you've accomplished
100%.
or something that you're grateful for.
Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah.
why I'm asking people is because I had to do it myself. Like, hey, you just told that person you're good. Why are you good? Because you want to be, or is there evidence to say you're good? And like, well, both. Yeah, that was good. You know. And but yeah, the evidence is there. We just got to remind ourselves of it.
No, 100%. Well, that's such a strong mentality. I admire you so much.
Hey man, there's something about just making it through another day, right? It's like, you know, again, I come back to I've lost so many friends and so many people
Yeah.
that you just kind of go,
Can
man, I got to use
imagine.
my time. Like, how do I use my time? You know, how do I steward the days that I've been given, and how do I add purpose to my days in a way that brings honor to the memory of those I love and miss, right? So, because I can't bring them back. So what I
Yeah.
can do is live out the things I learned from them with the time that I have, right? So, yeah, but everybody has got to have this system, this framework. Like my deal is like, hey, find maps that matter to you. But look at life as living on these maps, right? Find evidence to support that you're good when you say you're good, because the evidence is probably closer than you think. And if you're just trying to convince yourself you're good, great. Just give you ways to prove to yourself that you're good. Right? That next breath, that next smile, that next phone call, all those things are evidence that you can and are and will be doing good someday soon.
But there's several resources that exist. Like if you ask yourself, hey, I'm not good, there's resources that I'll make sure to link for you guys. And there's always someone to talk to. I'm available as well and can point you in the right direction if I'm not able to help.
Yeah, and here's
it's just
something.
so important.
Anybody who watch this or listen to this, I'd encourage you, go to Google, type in "I'm not okay," and watch. Boom. Watch the returns on it. You'll be surprised by the resources that become available by Googling "I'm not okay."
Wow.
It's pretty shocking
It's
and
incredible.
encouraging. Because one, you find out that hey, there's other people that are not okay too. I'm not terminally unique. I'm not the only one that's broken.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what Hemingway say. All of us are broken, and most of us are better at the broken places. Right. So lots of resources.
No, that's incredible. Yeah, and also going back to what you were saying about authenticity and vulnerability. So I'm usually a very private person, but for whatever reason, I just completely was like, it's kind of a blur when you're grieving or you go through a traumatic event. I don't know if you can relate to this, but I coped by, again, feeling everything I need to feel. And I was posting videos on TikTok, but it was more so to turn it into art and pay my respects and honor the life of Cameron and just happy memories. And I did not expect it to go viral. So many people were like, wait, he looks so happy. What happened? And didn't even share the cause of death till months later because I prayed a lot about it. And I wanted to turn it into a purpose. And then people are saying, just seeing your grief, I can't do this to my girlfriend now. I'm a man and I've been watching this on repeat several times, crying. I'm finally getting the help I need. I can't do this
That's
to my
great.
girlfriend. So just being like speaking your truth and people seeing kind of the aftermath,
Yeah.
that's, and just knowing like, okay, but I felt bad because like I didn't have solutions. So it's like male perspective, like from you, like you've played in the NFL, you're still an entrepreneur, and just hearing takeaways on how you stay strong, how you hold yourself accountable and your friends to make sure that you're actually doing okay is invaluable.
Yeah.
Like that's what I was lacking before, the male perspective and guidance on takeaways. And like
And a
you're
lot of
saying.
times, I tell people, like, most good people want to count more than they
Yeah.
cost. And so what happens is you feel like you start costing more than you count, and that virtuous part of you will go, hey, maybe it would do better if I stopped costing them so much. There's a goodness that's in you that's making you ask that question. But you got to remember that that's not your question to answer. I tell
Right.
my friends all the time, it's like, hey, man, you can ask if I'd be better off without you. You just don't get to answer it for me. Like, let me answer it. If you're asking yourself
Yeah.
that question, don't answer it for me. It's my question to answer. You can ask the question, but I get to answer it. And the answer is no. There's no scenario where I'm better off without you. So ask
Okay.
away,
Yeah.
but don't answer for me. And when you tell people that, they're like, okay, I believe you. Hey, will you be better off without me? Nah, I wouldn't be better off without you, right? So, again, it's steering our goodness in the greater directions.
I love that. And I know you were saying that you've lost several buddies and
Sure.
people you know. So how do you continue to honor them in their lives and kind of live for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's every day. Every day is an opportunity to share what you miss most about someone, and to share stories about them, and all these, and incorporate those things that you loved about them. I tend to live like I lived if they were still with me. If they were watching me, what would they want me to do? What would they not want me to do? The thing I learned from them, everything is a form of tribute, right? When it comes to grieving, what I tell people is like, man, when I've dealt with a friend who took his own life, I allow myself to be mad at him. Because the only people I ever really get mad at are people I love. And when I'm mad at people I love, what happens is I stop being mad at them over time, and I just start loving them again. But it's an honest way, right? And then I find that I just miss them and love them again. I just got to be honest with myself and got to be honest with a person, and that kind of creates this equilibrium between me and their memories again. And I just keep taking the hill after that, right? And I try to learn from that and help people not make the mistake that was made in that person's life, and be honest about the whole thing.
Wow. That's a really healthy way to look at it.
Good.
Yeah, and that's natural, to feel that in the grieving process.
Yeah.
It's like ebbs and flows.
I only get mad at people I love.
Yeah,
But I never,
that's
like,
true.
my wife's mad at me all the time because she loves me a lot. And then
Yeah.
she's not mad at me. Then she's mad at me again, and then she's not mad at me. That's the way of it, right? So,
Yeah.
we just got to be honest with ourselves.
No,
Doesn't mean we don't
absolutely.
doesn't mean you don't love somebody if you're mad at them. In
That's
fact,
true.
It might mean that you actually loved them.
Yeah. If you're that affected,
Yeah.
it shows that,
Yeah.
love was there.
Yeah.
Wow. Describe to me an unforgettable experience while you were, I guess, from all the categories you described.
Yeah.
So from the field, the breakfast table, and while you're in the battlefield, if you could share some unforgettable
Man,
experiences.
I mean, again, there's just, I'm just,
That's a lot to throw
well,
at
I just
you.
remember it makes me remember how fortunate I am to have so many opportunities for that. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's so many unforgettable things. I wasn't here when my first daughter was born, so to kind of see her for the first time when she was 7 months old, to see my middle daughter be born, my youngest daughter be born, to see people again that I didn't, something happens, you're like, man, I wonder if they made it. And all of a sudden you seem like, you're good, and you're good. I mean, I just have, raising a bowl trophy over my head with guys I love more than anything in the world on the football field after 20-some years at the Naval Academy. Man, I have a library full of unforgettable moments, right? On each one of those maps. And that's kind of my story. My story is like mass unforgettable moments on each one of those maps. And when you do that, what happens, it becomes really easy to answer why you're okay.
Yeah.
Hey, prove it. Oh, which map do you want to talk about?
Yeah.
I've got, it is, and another thing for me is I try to look at when was my last most unforgettable moment, right? Like it could be on one of those maps or something relatively recent that's newly unforgettable, right? Massing unforgettable moments is really life in a lot of ways, right? And you can't mass unforgettable moments if you're not willing to wrestle with fear well, right? And just put yourself in a position where you're a little bit scared, but equally as excited. It's like that great scene in Armageddon. Like, I don't know, man. Maybe I'm 98% scared and 2% excited, or 2% scared and 98%. Can you make my seatbelts tied down really tight? Like, I don't want to fall out of this thing. That's just a healthy perspective of life, you know?
No,
So.
that's really well said. Well, this pulls me into my last question. It's a little lighthearted, and I'll give you some time to ruminate on this one too. What's a funny story that only your family knows about you?
Listen, I'm not doing this as a knee-jerk reaction. when I say that that's another hard one to answer. I try to live pretty out loud. So I think my family and my friends would argue on who has the funniest dumb story about Clint. I just tend to be pretty out loud. So I think I've done as many dumb things in front of my wife and daughters as I have in front of my friends. And so I don't know what my family would tell you. It'd be fascinating to hear their answer to that story, right? I was telling a funny story just earlier today, because I do these things all the time. We have a very, very dear friend in our kind of ecosystem of companies, and his daughter is beautiful, and she's married to a guy, and I met him last night for the first time, and it was only really about maybe 6 months ago where I realized that was his actual name. Because I thought my friend just didn't like his son-in-law. I was like, man, he does not like that guy. He just calls him Guy all the time. And finally I was like, man, what's his real name? He's like, his name's Guy. I'm like, oh, so his name's Guy. Like, I just thought you didn't like him and you were referring him to Guy. He's like, no, his first name's Guy. I was like, oh, well, that makes way more sense, right? But the guy sitting right there is like, really thought my name was, I didn't know what your name was. I thought he just called you Guy because he didn't like you. And now I know your name is Guy, and the whole thing makes more sense to me now, right? You won't have to search hard or long to figure out the last thing that people were like, he did what? What did what? But that's part of life too, right? When you're not afraid to, you just kind of do stuff, take notes, and listen to your friends, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, you have such a positive attitude. And I actually did forget to ask you one thing.
Sure.
And it's a little bit more of a somber one, but are there any last words that really stuck out to you, like from any of your buddies that you lost? Like any last conversations?
I'll tell you, I remember my dad said something. It's funny, I hear my dad, I'm older now than he was when he passed away. And it's amazing the stuff you hear later when there's a difference between hearing and listening, right? So I heard him and I listen to him now. And I remember one of the things that's really profoundly affected me. I went up to see him in the hospital. This big guy was like me. And I remember I was up there by myself, and I was a senior in high school, and he said, son, we got to talk about what happens if this doesn't work out. And I was not ready to hear that. I was like, nope, not, power positive thinking, all this other stuff. And I remember he grabbed my wrist. And in Beowulf, there's a moment where they switch the perspective to Grendel. So Beowulf grabs Grendel's arm, and all of a sudden Grendel starts talking. And he starts talking about how he'd never been grabbed by that before, and he knew he was grabbed by a hero, right? And that's the image that popped in my head when my dad grabbed my arm. I realized how physically strong he still was. And he looked at me and he goes, son, leaders talk about what they don't want to talk about. They say what they don't want to say. They listen to what they don't want to hear, and they plan for what they don't want to happen. And the willingness to do that is what makes him a leader. And that's just that kind of profound wisdom that I've kind of lived. And he used to say stuff all the time. He said, so there's two kinds of people in the world, but it would change every time. So there's like 40 kinds of people in the world. But he's a big guy, so I didn't say anything. And but he's like, son, there's men that walk in the room and say, here I am. And there's men that walk in the room and say, there you are. And I want you to be a there you are kind of man, because isn't it neat to know that someone's been looking for you? And every one of those friends I've lost, I've got some piece of wisdom that was uniquely theirs, right? And obviously the ones from my father are the ones that I think about often as a father. But if you give me enough time, I could come up with 100 things that I never would have heard from anybody else before I lost them. And then during Carry the Load, I helped start this thing called Carry the Load. It's a really special, really neat deal. And I was walking with the daughter of one of our friends that we lost, and my daughter, and they're about the same age. And it was breaking my heart because, why do I get to walk with my daughter and she didn't get to walk with her dad? And she's incredible, and I love her, and my daughter loves her. And I remember she kind of met up with her mom, and they were hanging out, and my daughter and I kept walking. And she goes, Dad, are you sad? And I'm like, yeah, of course I'm sad. I said, but I could be sad because I miss my friends, or I could be sad because I never knew such men. And I'll take this sad. I would rather be sad because I miss my friends that have never known a man like him, right? So you can choose your sad, and you can stay sheltered and isolated and never run a risk of losing anybody. And at the end of your days, you'll wish you'd have done it differently. Or you can choose the risk of being sad and missing people. And the moments you had with them before you miss them will always be worth that. So, yeah, there you are. That's kind of that's I've always loved that. I've always loved being a there you are. You just got those people in your life where every time they see you, they look like they've been waiting for you the whole time. It's just the coolest thing.
The best.
I've got friends that are like, man, I've been looking for you. I'm like, dude, that makes me feel so good. Do I owe you money? What'd I do? Did I do something wrong? But it's just cool. And I've always wanted to be a there you are kind of guy, like my dad was. And like the best people I know were, right? Mm-hmm. And so there you are. How you doing? Prove it.
Prove it.
Like those three things. Hey,
Prove
there
it.
you are. How you doing? Prove it. So
That's incredible. No, that's really well said. I mean, with the human experience, like, of course, we're going to experience pain. But
Yeah.
with all of that pain comes love, and it's better to have experienced that than not at all.
yeah.
Yeah.
100%. They're not like museum pieces that are supposed to exist behind this like red rope that no one gets to touch you. I always say fear the unscarred man because he's either lying to you or he's never dared, and both of those are dangerous.
Love that. But how many lieutenants would you say you have in your posse? Like you're saying you have a great support system with your buddies and you've been able to build that for yourself. But how many people would you say you have to run with open arms that you can trust anything with?
34.
That's
I mean,
incredible,
it's just like,
yeah.
yeah, by design, man. I've kind of painted myself in a corner where I'm just surrounded by people like, hey, dude, that's a hard number. I mean, it's just, again, I'm never, I will deliberately discomfort myself, but I will never deliberately disadvantage myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That's
I seek
incredible.
discomfort, but not disadvantage, right? There's a
that.
difference between discomfort and disadvantage,
Yeah.
right? And I know the distinction. So I seek discomfort, but not disadvantage. Does that make sense?
No, it does,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Well,
again, another hard question to answer because I got a lot of them.
no, that's a really high number, and that's incredible, and just shows, your courage to wear your heart in your sleeve, and you're that support for people in return, and as a result, you've attracted that. But awesome. If you wouldn't mind sharing with our listeners where they can find out more about Carry the Load.
Yeah, go to carrytheload.org. It's really amazing. Yeah, now's a great time to be looking at it because they're getting ready for the next year, next year's rally, next year's relay, and then amazing organizations like Adaptive Training Foundation, ATF, and One Tribe Foundation with Jacob Schick and 22 Kill. I mean, there's just no shortage of amazing people doing amazing things, right?
Incredible.
Which again, this is there's so many resources. It would be interesting to see what the page one is on Google when you type in "I'm not okay."
Yeah,
I'd be really interested to see what that is today.
I'm curious as well.
Because it grows every time, right?
Yeah,
Because more and more people are willing to ask that, willing to say that,
it's true.
and more people are willing to have good answers for it when that gets said.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's really well said. Well, thank you so much for
No,
coming
my
in.
pleasure.
And again,
This
I
was
didn't
fun.
get a chance to thank you for serving. Thank you
Oh,
so
thanks for
much for
being
your
worth it.
time serving. I feel like we don't say that enough to our veterans, and it's something we can all be better at, including myself. Just saying thank you for serving. If you see someone in uniform, thank them.
I always say,
I challenge all of you.
I always go, thanks for being worth it. And I mean, I started doing this 10 years ago. And when I said it the first time, people were like, what? I'm like, yeah, thanks for because that's what you're wanting. You're on the side of some mountain going, man, I hope these people are worth it. All of a sudden you come home and you see some gal teaching for her 25th year in a disadvantaged school district, and like, oh, she's worth it. You see some firefighter, police officer, like, well, they're worth it. See some single mom working 2 jobs to give her kids something, like, oh, she's worth it.
Yeah.
And there are no shortage of people that are worth it if you broaden your aperture enough to see what sacrifice looks like in their world, right?
Wow.
So, yeah, thanks for being worth it.
So well said. Thank you for being worthy.
You bet.